Hello everyone, my name is Cliff and welcome back to my channel. This is Cliff's Dark Gems. Today I present to you my first ever original book tag. Now this was going to be just simply called a post-apocalyptic book tag, but there are too many apocalypse tags out there, so I've decided to call it Swan Song Post-Apocalyptic Book Tag, because it's been inspired by my favourite book of all time, Robert McCammon, Swan Song. Please stay tuned. When I first worked on this tag, I actually had to change some of the questions because I found them a little bit too tricky. And I want this tag to be more open-ended so that pretty much anyone can do it, not just the lover of horror, such as myself. So some of these tags are open for fantasy lovers, pretty much any genre that's out there. Okay, and now for the first prompt. The first prompt is, it's the end of the world as you know it. Okay, I'm not going to sing anymore, I promise you. And don't sing the second line along with me because it doesn't apply. The first prompt is that, and it is name a book with an abrupt bad ending. And I've gone with John Saul, The Unloved. Now, if there are any John Saul fans out there, this is the only book I've read by him. Please let me know if there's something better. I did have a lot of promise. It was very creepy and unsettling in the beginning. And I expected so much more, but towards the latter half of the book and the end, for me it just descended into some kind of ridiculous slasher movie, and for me it was also pretty predictable as well. So that's my first choice, and that is John Saul, The Unloved, but you've got to love the cover as well. The second prompt is Shattered Earth. Name a book that made you feel damaged and broken inside. Now, I'm trying to avoid books I've spoken about already on this channel, but I have to bring in, we need to talk about Kevin. This is really the most uncomfortable, depressing, just heartbreaking book that I've ever read, and I definitely felt damaged and shattered inside to a certain extent. It's traumatizing, about a school shooting. I'm not going to go through the rest of the plot. Please check out my other videos. My earlier videos to find out what I have to say about this book. We need to talk about Kevin. Okay, the next prompt is sickness, plague, radioactive poisoning. And this is name a book where a central character is afflicted with a disease or a disability. And I had to go with a fantasy series here. And it is one of my favourite fantasy series, even though it's kind of conflicting for many people, and that is The Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. This is only part one in a three-part epic, and Thomas Covenant is a leper, and this is central to the story because he's transported into another world, and he does not trust this world because it threatens his very sanity and his safety. Now, Thomas Covenant, Stephen Donaldson, his father actually worked with lepers in India and has extensive knowledge about their treatment and the way that they basically have to survive. And it's everything that Thomas Covenant goes through is completely at odds with the way he's being taught that he has to survive. He has to check himself the whole time for cuts, and this land makes him healthy. He is a miserable sod. And this has put many people off the series because he is constantly miserable. But you need to see where he's coming from. And personally, I think this is a very, very interesting book and a very interesting premise for a fantasy novel. That is Thomas Covenant, The Unbeliever. Okay, the fourth prompt applies to many of the population that survive. And I've simply said good, humane, brave. And the question is, name a feel-good book that warms your heart. And for me, I've chosen Ray Bradbury, Dandelion Wine. And now I know I've got this book somewhere in all the piles of book all over my house. I read it like this year, but I cannot for the life of me find it. So sorry, the books that I don't own or I can't find, they're going to be up there, right? This is a beautiful, beautiful, magical novel. It's short, it's gorgeous, coming of age. The way he writes about summer, it really does warm your heart. It's not a horror, and there are some kind of scary scenes here and there, but I don't know, with Ray Bradbury holding your hand along the way, this book is just gorgeous, and it's beautiful on so many levels, and I would highly recommend it. That is Dandelion Wine. And the next prompt is an antithesis to what I've just been talking about, which I've called Evil, Warlords, Power. Name a book that contains your most hated character. Now, this was a tough one because I really wanted to go back to Swan Song, because there is a character in that book, that epic, post-apocalyptic horror novel, that is just simply pure evil, called Roland. But I promised myself I would try and find something different. Now this book is going to be an unpopular opinion, because this is a classic horror story loved by many, many people. But the first time I read it, I didn't see what the hype was about. It wasn't a bad book. Perhaps I need to give it a reread, because it simply didn't do it for me. And that is, and I'm sorry, but it's The Haunting of Hill House. I expect to be terrified, I expected to be horrified. I just found myself frustrated. And I think one of the problems was the characters, and in particular there was one character that came in the end of the story, this doctor's wife I think it was, that just drove me nuts. She was so controlling over everyone in the house, and I absolutely despised her. And she kind of ruined the story for me, probably dropped a couple of stars for that reason. Yeah, that is The Haunting of Hill House. I will read it again at some stage. Okay, the sixth prompt is the struggle to survive. Name a book where a character or characters have to put aside their morals, ethics and values in order to live and survive. Now, there were a number of things that were on my mind when I thought about what I was going to present. First of all, the terror is a very real one, but I've spoken about that on my channel. I was thinking pretty much any war novel you could put in there, because war is hell and men have to put aside all their concerns about humanity in order to function. Now, I chose, and this is a weird one, The Lord of the Flies by William Golding. I know he's an author that is not very well loved anymore. He was an alcoholic and did some bad things, but this is an absolute classic. I've read it, I've taught it, and all I'm going to say about that in terms of the question is that there's mob rules. There's a hive mind where the boys separate into two teams. Jack becomes almost like a Hitler-esque leader, and if the boys do not follow him, they are in danger. They have to put aside all things about civilization, morals, ethics, and they become almost tribal. This is a powerful story, but as I say, I'm not going to talk about this at length, because this book can be dissected and spoken about, but I choose Lord of the Flies. The number 7th prompt is absent technology. Name a book that makes you think of a life without modern gadgets, like cell phones, television, so on. This could lend itself to many genres, including the fantasy genre, dark fantasy, but I have decided to go with a book based on a true story, Into the Wild, which is about a character called Christopher Kindle, I think McCandless, and he leaves everything behind, his life, his parents, and he chooses to go and venture off into the Alaskan wilds and just live his life free from materialism. I know this book is also conflicted for many, many people because of the way that he goes about just leaving all his support structures. A lot of people think it was a very stupid thing to do, which perhaps it was, but a lot of people see him as a bit of a hero. like a rebel that just goes out and wants to live life free. Now the reason I liked this book was because I used to be a game ranger. I spent a lot of time in the bush, so in some ways I can kind of relate to this character, although I probably had a better chance of surviving than him. That is Into the Wild. Okay, the next prompt is number 8, Societal Collapse. Name the most dark, depressing book you have read. Now I've got two choices here. Number 1, The Bell Jar by SYLVIA PLATH. Now SYLVIA PLATH was a troubled woman who took her own life, and I think it was about a month before that she had this book published about a character that can only have been murdered on herself, who slowly breaks down and ends up taking her life. And it's a very traumatic, dark read, but also as an ex-psychology major I found it very, very interesting, and just the way that the prose and how things just unravel for this woman in the story. So it was pretty depressing. My other choice is my only Stephen King book on this list, and it's Pet Sematary. I've spoken about it. I think this is the darkest book that he has ever written. I think he himself admits that it is the darkest book he has ever written, and he kind of, afterwards he kind of regretted doing it. He just thought the subject matter was too grim. And it is. As I said before, it's a study on death, and it really, really changes you and makes you think about things, and not always in a good way, in a very uncomfortable way. So yeah, those are my two choices for number 8. Number 9, There's Always Hope. Name the most optimistic book you have read. And that has to be Neil Gaiman's Stardust. Now I've read the book and I've seen the movie as well. I love both. I actually think this is one where I actually love the movie more. It's just so wonderful and heartwarming and so on. And even in the book, even the dark parts where there's fighting and so on, it's just filled with magic and filled with this imagination and this energy. And it kind of reminds me a little bit about, what's that film called? The Princess Bride. It's just gorgeous, and the characters are magical, and it's fairy and fantastical, and I've always loved that. It always puts a smile on my face. So that's my choice. Neil Gaiman's Stardust. And finally, my last prompt is Fresh Beginnings. Name a book with a perfect opening chapter. A paragraph that really draws you into the story. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to read the opening passage from Clive Barker's Weird World. We don't have enough time for me to read the whole chapter, but this is a truly magical book, and I just love this opening passage. Here we go. Nothing ever begins. There is no first moment, no single word or place from which this or any other story springs. The threads can always be traced back to some earlier tale, and to the tales that preceded that. Though as a narrator's voice recedes, the connections will seem to grow more tenuous, for each age will want tale told as if it were of its own making. Thus the pagan will be sanctified, the tragic become laughable, great lovers will stoop to sentiments, and demons dwindle in clockwork toys. Nothing is fixed, in and out the shuttle goes, fact and fiction, mind and matter, woven into patterns that may have only this in common, that hidden amongst them is a filigree which will with time become a world. It must be arbitrary then, the place at which we choose to embark, somewhere between a past half forgotten and a future as yet only glimpsed. This place, for instance. Okay everyone, now I want to tag some people. I'm not tagging people I've tagged before, even though many of you watch my channel and communicate with me. I wanted to tag people that I haven't spoken of before, and it's mainly medium-sized to larger booktubers that I watch regularly. So here goes. Michael K. Vaughan, Criminology, Michelle's Melancholy, Reading This Life, Tall Guy Reads, Typical Books, David's Book Reviews, Mindy's Book Journey, Plagued by Visions, Cash's Book Cemetery, Slime and Slashes, and Fiber RT. Now, these are all awesome channels. Go check them out. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Please take care everyone. Keep those pages turning, and cheers.